Hi, in this building of Tony Ray Tiger Moth, I'm going to begin construction of the cabane, which is made up of aluminium tubing, some rather nicely laser cut steel sheet, and also the fuel tank which sits on top and locates the upper wings. So buckle in, get your favourite tipple in hand, and watch me putting this together. Well, these are the parts to make up the fuel tank. A couple of things have struck me in the building of the kit so far. The first one is the quality of the laser cutting. I've never built a kit that's been laser cut like this. Some of them I've built, such as the, was it the Matador? Or it may have been the model that I built for Roy. I can't remember what it was called now. I had to actually just cut the pieces out that were printed onto the sheet. It was only one step above total scratch building from a plan. So I haven't got any experience of laser cutting until this model. If they're all as good as this, I'm amazed at it. It literally locks together without any fettling. Well, I tell a lie. In the whole build so far, I've had to actually take a piece of sandpaper to two parts and tickle the slightest amount off to get them to go together. Other than that, they've been perfect. And the other thing that I've been very impressed with is the quality of the wood selection. It seems to be spot on almost all occasions. I'll point out the one which wasn't in a second, or a couple of areas where I think a little bit more thought would have made for a better design. But overall, the quality of the wood's spot on. It's when it needs to be plywood, it is. The quality of the balsa is up to now has been perfect. When you want hard balsa, it's hard. When you want soft balsa, so you can bend it, it's exactly that. A couple of things I will point out. So on the fuselage here, these runners on the side, which give the fuselage its shape, they are soft balsa to allow you to bend it. But it's so soft that it would be easily broken. Now, I've got round that by gluing a thin strip of 1/64th ply onto the top. Cliff Harvey got round the problem by just simply replacing this. I think he'd replace it with something like a beechy or spruce. But that I think was an error. And the other one, linked to what we're going to do today, the cabanes are attached here. I've got a couple of bolts in place, and if you look closely, you can see there's a square of material that's a different colour, and that's because I've actually put an insert of ply in here. As it's designed, when you put the cabane onto here, it would have ordinarily, or as designed, be screwing onto balsa, which is just going to crush. So I cut out these areas and inlaid some hard plywood so that you've actually got something to screw against. But other than that, I've been very impressed. If we now look and turn our attention to this fuel tank, the way to build this is to actually have the computer open on the relevant photographic page as you go along, but it's fairly obvious where everything goes, I think. So let's have a crack at this one. C1 and C2. There you go there. And these parts pop in. Now they are to take the bolts which hold the upper wings in place. Now I've got a thought on that may involve, and these are a spacer, a couple of spacers. I've got a thought on that, and I'll explain more of it when we get that far, but we'll just do a dry run to see how everything fits together. And this is something that Tony suggests that you do with all the parts, which is, good advice. And as you see, look, it just locks together. There's no glue used there. And I think that's very impressive. Put those spacers back in there and put that piece back in there. A couple of the little diagrams, the instructions, it isn't obvious what you're looking for. So for example, these parts C5, which are clearly the end plates, they aren't shown on any of the photographs, but it's fairly obvious they have to go somewhere, and if you've used all the other parts, they must go there. But there's, apart from little things like that, which I suppose would be very expensive to correct now that they've been done, it would make for a perfect kit if Tony did that, I think. So these are obviously the end plates that tidy everything up. I think you get the general idea. So what I'll do is I'll actually start gluing this together, and I'll explain my thoughts about the locking nuts, bolts for the upper wing. But let's glue this together first, and then we'll crack on. Be back with you. I'll be back with you in a second. There's the main structure glued together. The end caps need to go on now. I'm going to apply the glue over the surface, but I'm also going to clamp them, because I don't think it'll do any harm to do so. Now, there are a number of bolts that go through this for the cabane itself, and there are two bolts that go through into nuts to retain the wings. So there's a dowel that goes in there, or a plug that goes in there that's metal plated, that slides in, and then you put a bolt through in the design from the top, and it screws into a nut. Now the problem with that is that if it goes in from the top, it's going to be very visible, and frankly, it's going to spoil the look of the tank itself. But if you put it in from below, and it's a metal bolt into a metal nut, it's my experience, particularly with IC engines, that the frames will vibrate quite a lot, far more than they will with an electric model. And I have had an occasion where the bolt actually vibrated out of a cabane strut and an interplane strut. It's happened to me, and I've got round that by inserting locking nuts where possible. Now, the locking nuts are great because once you've got them bolted in place, you know that they're going to hold and the bolt's not going to vibrate out. You can use them again and again without worrying about that. So what I've done is I've ordered some M2 locking nuts. We've basically got a nylon insert in them to replace the ones that come with the kit. To retain the wings. The ones that hold the cabane in place, these holes here, the ones that hold the cabane in place, they're fine because I will Loctite them or thread lock them in place, and they're not going to be taken on and off. But as the wings are going to be slid on and off, I'm concerned that they may vibrate loose. Now, the other option is the one that Cliff Harvey did to stop, to avoid spoiling the look of the model, and he's actually located the bolts from below. Now that's an option. He did mention to me, I've chatted to him, that you've got to be careful that you can have access to those bolts when it comes to the interplane struts. Sorry, not the interplane struts, the rigging wires that come down from the tank, that they do sort of almost get in the way. So I'm going to look at that. But if you put them in from below, this issue about them vibrating loose and falling out is even more troublesome. So that being the case, as I say, I've ordered some. Sorry, I'm not concentrating on what I'm saying. I've ordered some locking nuts. They should arrive today, and they're held in place here with a little wooden retainer. So the slot in, there's a shape piece, and the M2 nuts fit in. The bolts go through the top. I'll probably copy Cliff and put them from below, because I'll be confident that they ain't going to vibrate loose if I put the locking nuts in. But I don't have to do that at the moment. I'm hoping by this afternoon they'll have arrived and I'll be able to put those in place. But that's my logic behind it. Let's put a few clamps on here, and then I think it's almost coffee time here in sunny Gateshead. Sorry, that's pushing it a bit. Let this all dry properly, and then we'll move on to the next stage, which is actually putting all these nuts in place, and then we'll actually get to look at the cabanes themselves, which use a really neat jig to ensure that everything is the correct length and lines up. So I'll put these on, and then we'll come back when it's all dried and I've had a coffee, and my mind will be racing with the caffeine, and I'll be able to solve all the issues with the modelling. Right, see you soon. So while the fuel tank's drying, this is the next stage in setting up the cabane. There's a jig which will ensure, hopefully, that everything lines up perfectly. We have a sheet of steel parts that have been, I presume, laser cut out, and some 3mm aluminium tubing. And first thing I need to do is to identify the parts and cut them out. Now, I did advise Cliff Harvey the way to do it would be to use a chisel X-blade and punch them out. And I don't think I've got one handy. So I'm going to try and use this heavy Stanley knife to get any out that are stubborn to be removed. Now, you can tell by the shape and by looking at the photograph on the instruction manual online. So I need to cut these out, find them, cut them out, and put them on. I'm going to try. There's one there. I've marked them with a pencil that you'll probably not be able to see. And there's a tiny little tab. There's a tiny little tab where the parts are still attached. Now that's easy because there's only two of them. You can sort of swivel them out. So there's one. And I'm only going to take enough out to do one side at a time, because experience has shown me that if you start pulling more bits out, you're almost certainly going to lose them. Well, they're coming out fairly easily. I think the problem that Cliff came across, which obviously I'm going to hear as well, is when there's more than two fixing points, they're awkward to remove. When there's only two, you can swivel them and they come out okay. I suspect that's going to be the problem with that one. Okay, there's a single, this one here. See if I can get that to move. Yeah, this is a sort of issue. getting it going. That's out. Once you get it moving, it's fine. That one there, now that's handed, there's a bigger hole and a smaller hole. So you need to line those up carefully. And then this funny shaped one, which I've found, I believe. I did find it, honestly. Right, it's this one here. I'm hoping that's enough to get it. Yeah, it is. There you go. So that's the first part of the process. And then there are 3 lengths of tubing. Longer length. And 2 shorter ones. 1 and 2. And the thing that you need to do is you need to flatten the end, drill through it using the jig as a mark, and then round the ends to neaten it up. And to flatten it, I'm going to try these smooth pliers. Well, they've worked, sort of. I think they might need to go in a vise actually to get a better hit. So I'm going to flatten the ends in the vise to get a nice flat surface, and then we'll start drilling these up and sifting through the box of goodies to find the nuts and bolts to screw it all together. I hope you can see here that I'm using the jig to make sure that these holes are drilled in exactly the right location. Mark them off, drill them, and then screw the bolt through and make sure that they're an accurate fit. And then on this one you can see I've rounded the end. This one's yet to be done. So that's the process. There's only 3 to do per cabane strut. So I'll crack on with that and then we'll see how it all sort of comes together. There you go. All the holes drilled, all jigged up, accurate to the jig. And that's hopefully is going to ensure that everything's square. Other side to do and the ends to round. And then that part of the process completed. The cabane assembly sort of bolted together. Obviously the tank's not finished yet, but I just wanted to make sure everything worked, and it did. This area here needed a little bit trimmed away so that the struts themselves could clear, but it's surprisingly rigid as it is. So I'll bolt it onto the fuselage. We'll see what it looks like. Nothing's tightened up and nothing's been Loctited together or thread locked together, but I just want to see how it fits onto the fuselage now. Well, this is a dry run. It's just been loosely screwed together. I say loosely, I just haven't nipped everything up because after all, this will have to come off for spraying when it comes to that stage. And obviously the tank isn't complete, but it's remarkably solid. And the inserts here, the hardwood inserts here or plywood inserts here, are definitely essential. Without them, you would be digging in to the soft balsa and you would never be able to get a tight fit. So I would say that's an important modification that you must do. So I'll take this back off, I'll screw these out, and I'll finish this off, and that'll be the final part of this build. When it comes to the actual corrugation, I think I'm going to use the same method that I did with the Gypsy Moth, and that is I'm going to use some model railway or model railroad corrugation, plastic corrugation, and cover it in that. But let's get this off and get it finished. Here's the fuel tank now. These are the little blocks that hold the retaining nuts, that hold the wings in place. There's a set of 4 of them, 2 to glue together. So I'll do that now. And we'll get these put in place. Now, I had seriously thought about having the bolts that retain the wings coming from underneath. Unfortunately, although Cliff Harvey's managed to do it, it's probably worth revisiting his videos to see how he's done it. But it struck me that that would just be a real faff at the flying field. There's not a lot of room there underneath, and as a result, I'm going to chicken out and put them on the top. It's not ideal, but that's where I am with it. I'm going with them on the top. Right, let's find the nuts that sit in there. Right, the next part of the equation is that there aren't any M3 bolts included in the kit, which is a shame. It's one of those things that seem to have plagued, plague's the wrong word, a little bit of an oversight on Tony's part. So the bolts to fit through here just don't exist, and now I come to think of it, neither do these nuts. They're not going to work either. Right, I'm going to have a think about this. The ones I've got aren't the right size to fit those. So it's a little omission from the kit, which makes for a little bit of an awkward pause in the build. Let's have a think. Okay, one problem solved, another one rears its head. So I've got some bolts that are the correct length to go through here. Yeah, and they go through the lugs that hold onto the wing. Well, wait a minute, let me show you them. So these are the metal plates, and here's the plywood filler that goes on the inside. Obviously this goes into there. It's a nip and fit, so they're going to need to be sanded down, and then the bolt would go through here and obviously retains the wing. Yeah, however, these inserts to hold the nut, to hold them in place, the actual nut itself, the shape that's been lasered out is too small. It's a size, it's an M2 size bolt, nut, sorry, where you need an M3. And an M2, frankly, just wouldn't be enough, I think, anyway, in holding a wing on. And it would be too small, be a rattling fit in the lugs that fit in. So I'm going to have to open these out to take that, which will be fun. And I have in my stash some longer bolts that would do the job. So it's a little bit irritating, but it has to be done. And this is the plate that goes across the top to line up the position for the bolts to go in. So I'm going to crack on with that, and we'll see where we get with it. Cutting these out next to get that to fit, and when I'm happy with that, I'll glue the whole lot into place. A little bit irritating, but these are the sort of things you have to work through. It's obviously not being picked up in a post-production trial that there's a mistake here. So there we go, problem solved. I drilled the hole out and then forced the nut in. I'm going to run a little bit of C around the inside just to make sure it doesn't come loose, and then that'll work with the M3 bolts that I'm going to use. I may do another modification, and that is have a tube coming through here to the bolt so that the bolt can slide in, but it's easy to get in and out. Well, one thing at a time, Mark. You can see I've lined them up now, and an interesting point is that these are handed. That's a shorter side. If you put them in the wrong way around, the bolts won't line up with the dowels, so that's something you're going to need to be aware of. And as Cliff noted in his video, these are too thick. Once you put the metal plates on them, they ain't going to go through those holes. Now, you could have opened these up, but that would have meant rejigging this. I think this just needs to be thinned down before the plates are epoxied on, glued on, etc. So I'll line these up now, get them glued in. We're moving forward. That's set now, I'm happy with that. I've unscrewed the bolts a little, and I've put this CC2 piece in, which is a sort of to line it up. And I'm going to use that to line up where I glue this on. So I'll put a little bit of C here. You can see here's the glue for this job. And then we'll line this up. If need be, I'm going to have to live with 2 holes in the top of the fuel tank, but there might be a way of disguising that. Now, I've glued the end piece on, both ends. This is the balsa that's provided for the cladding. So we'll just free this from the sheet. And we'll start at the bottom. It's the easiest part to start with, I think. Well, that's testament to how close this laser cutting is, because that's just popped in. I'm really impressed with that. So we'll line it up at the end, and I'll glue it to the end first. I'm going to use C again. Get that glued first. And then that simply folds round. So see inside the groove. Yeah, the quality of the laser cutting. This is what laser cutting's about. It's clearly the future. Trying to think of the model that I built for Roy, where it was simply printed on, and you had to there you go, printed on. You had to cut it out, and to a certain extent, it was actually crushed on. There's a little split there. Now that's come about because it could have probably done with dampening, which I'll do on the upper side, but I'll fill that with a bit of C here, and then when it's sanded, the dust will fill it and you won't even see that. So I'll do that there. I'll do the same on this side, but like I say, I might dampen it slightly this time on the outer surface to avoid that happening. I'll just wet the outer surface a little bit. Bear with me. Well, there you can see the effect of adding a little bit of moisture to this end and steam from the kettle. If you haven't got a kettle, if you're in the USA, I know kettles aren't on a thing. Just over an open pan. On the hob, be careful. Just gluing this first part. With a CA, and the rest I'm going to do with a brush and some white glue. I can find where I've put the brush, because it's such a neat fit, it'll virtually hold itself in position. Sometimes I use CA as a tack instead of a pin, a chemical pin, so to speak. And that's what I'm going to do here. Just going to put a little bit of CA in here. Hold it down till it takes. I'm obviously going to have to cut some slithers for here, but we'll do that in a second. Now the remainder will be made up of what's left here, so let's cut this. We'll do the underside first, I think, this time. Mark on where we'll go to. Which is what I wanted. I've actually cut it slightly oversized, which is fine. You can see there. So I'll cut that again. Must be fairly close now. Yep, I can live with that. So we're going to apply some CA. Yes, white glue would work, but I think there would be a problem in holding it in position. Really is a wonder glue, CA. I know some people are a little bit concerned it might be brittle, and I think you pick the glue for the job. And I think that glues in general have just come on leaps and bounds in the time that I've been modelling from 50 odd years ago. As a teenager, there was only really a couple of glues available. I can remember when PVA was introduced, it was a big revelation to a lot of people at the time. And CA, well, C was so expensive, it was more than Chanel No. 5, I think, when it first came out. It's still not cheap, but I think you get a lot of mileage out of it. There we go, that's that set. I'm going to give it a bit of kicker to help it along. Is this going to be stuck to my fingers? Shall we find out? Not too bad. Right. Now, similar thing here. Join those two. I think I'm going to wet this as well because it's quite severe, the curve at the top. Yeah, I'm just going to wet this on this surface. Here we go. Curve now. See the glue. You know, if this was done with white glue, you'd have pins everywhere. It would look like a porcupine. And then you'd be trying to pin into plywood, which wouldn't go well. I can guarantee that. Now I'm going to use slightly thicker CA for here. Because this actually responds better to the kicker. Get it in, glue it down, push it in, there we go. Give it a blast. A little strip to do. That'll go. Push it in. Add the CA. These applicators available on the internet. You can buy them in packs of hundreds. Make a huge difference to the use of CA. Without them, you can just get in a real mess. There we go. That's going to sand down nicely. Job done. So I'll sand the whole thing and then we'll screw it back onto the cabane structure. Well, there we go, folks. That's everything in place. obviously not totally tightened up and certainly not thread locked yet, because it will need to come off to be sprayed, but it's gone together really well. A couple of issues regarding the lack of bolts and the incorrect size of the nuts to retain those bolts. Other than that, works well. You must put a hardwood inset in here if this is going to work. If you don't, it'll just crush the soft balsa and then it'll become a loose fitting. But I hope you've enjoyed that. If you have, please give it a thumbs up if you don't mind. If you go to the playlist which is attached, you can see the previous stages if you're new and you've just stumbled on this channel. And if you have, give to a look of Tony Ray's build by Cliff Harvey. He's completed the model and maidened it, and it looks gorgeous. So have a good day, folks. I hope you can get flying. If you can't, let's get creative.